This podcast, it's a Costard and Touchstone production. Hi, I'm Alan Katz. Welcome to The Donor, a modern horror story. This is episode 7, The Monster. As this is the final episode, I'm going to assume you've followed the story up till now and don't need a recap going back to square one. So, going back to square 6, I'll remind you that Hal was still living with the repercussions of his miscommunication with donor daughter Beka. What started with perhaps a poor word choice born of a hurry to get back on his bike blew up the whole relationship when Hal said he didn't know if he was suffering from genetic sexual attraction or not. As Beka began blowing up all of Hal's other donor-kid relationships, Hal learned that she had many of the attributes of a raging narcissist. To Hal, this explained most of what had happened to him and around him. But to Hal's surprise, donor son Jerry shrugged off the explanation. At least he listened to it. Donor daughter Janice, to whom Hal had grown very close, refused to do even that, which really hurt considering how Hal had been there for her emotionally. He'd provided a friendly connection in a foreign place when Janice most needed one, and he'd helped her financially to the tune of $40,000. After her refusal to even hear him out, Hal didn't speak to Janice for 2 years. Disappointed yet again, but still determined, Hal turned his focus to newly arrived at 23andMe donor daughter, Melissa.
So Melissa and I ultimately met. Again, I realized that by meeting these people, I had a much better chance of forming important bonds. We decided to meet at an ethnic restaurant close to where I had grown up and where she had grown up. She was familiar with the restaurant. What's interesting about this restaurant is that it's owned and run by Muslims, and I'm Jewish. I have a wonderful relationship with the manager of that restaurant, which is surprising because it's not like I went there all the time. When I was in the area, I'd go maybe 4 times a year. Christmas time, they would give me a bottle of wine. And then when I ultimately moved, I'd go there maybe once or twice a year. But every time I went in there, I got hugs from the manager. I knew about his family. He knew about mine, and very wonderful relationship with the manager of the restaurant. So I had agreed with Melissa to meet there. And she came with her significant other, her partner. They were seated first. And when they came in, they saw me come in and get this big hug and welcoming by the manager of the restaurant. So when I sat down and met her for the first time, she's going, "Who are you?" You know, to get this, we didn't get welcomed like that. How come you get welcomed like that? We had a wonderful dinner.
What kinds of things did you talk about?
Where she had come from, her upbringing, what it was like for her. She was very close to her mom. Her mom was successful. She had gone to college, had a job with the government, as did her spouse. Her spouse had a job with the government as well. They were in different departments. Her spouse had recently quit because they wanted to get pregnant. Specifically, the spouse was going to try to get pregnant. And they had mentioned this to me before, in one of our prior conversations. When I came to the restaurant, I came bearing gifts, as I did for the others. If you've ever seen the movie The Da Vinci Code, you might be familiar with something called a codex.
It's a code box.
Little code box. Has wheels with each wheel has all the letters of the alphabet. And if you arrange those in the right pattern, it'll open the codex. I put a check in there for $5,000 because I thought that would help for their IVF attempts. I also gave her a DVD to my favorite movie, The Dead Poets Society. Code word was going to be Carpe Diem. I give her the DVD and I give her this codex, and I said, I hope this helps you out. They had it figured out by the time they got home that night. They had seen the movie. So they knew the word. They got into it pretty quickly.
They contacted you and let you know?
They let me know. Yeah, she's very, very sweet. She thought that was wonderful. Towards the end of our dinner, the spouse had a syncopal episode. She fainted, and she literally just boink, forehead hit the table. At least we had gotten through the entrees. It was exciting. We called an ambulance, but I'm not sure we actually waited for the ambulance. She recovered quick enough. I told Melissa, I said, you ought to take her to the closest ER. Just have her checked out, make sure there isn't something significant. They'll probably do a CT of her brain and just make sure she didn't have a stroke or something crazy going on, which they did. It took a while apparently, but I got a message later on that everything checked out okay. So things with Melissa were pretty good at that point. We were talking fairly constantly. This predated the issues with Janice, so that we did have some group chats between Jerry, Janice, Melissa, and myself.
What were those like?
They were just very friendly and nothing deep. A lot of them were politically oriented. Melissa was a big baseball fan and we rooted for the same team. So sometimes we would talk about that. But over time, I heard less and less from Melissa until really I stopped hearing from her at all. And having learned my lesson with the others, I didn't really pursue it. But a long time had gone by, and maybe a year. Finally, I messaged her and said, hey, did I do something to piss you off? And of course, in the back of my mind, I'm thinking Beka got to her too. I wasn't really sure what was going on. I get this message back from her. And again, I hadn't heard from her in a year. She said, you caught me at a bad time at the hospital. My spouse is giving birth to a baby girl.
This was the in vitro money
That
delivering.
That had helped. Yeah.
What was that moment like? Because in a sense, you were paying for the birth of a granddaughter.
Obviously, I was very, very happy to have been able to help.
Is that your first grandchild?
Yeah, it would have been. Aries had 2 kids that I know of. So there were at least 3. I have no idea about the others. That's another thing. You know, when I talk to Jerry or I talk to Melissa, I don't inquire about the others at all. I don't want to put them in the spot. Obviously, I'm curious as to whatever happened to them, but...
Do you think of their kids as grandchildren in any way, shape, or form?
I've learned my lesson. Not the least. I'm glad that my genes are passed on again, for Jerry at least.
How did Janice play
When
out?
she said she didn't want to talk about it, that she didn't want to have this conversation, you know, I said to her at that point, I said, you know, I've made this discovery and I want to talk to you about it. I want to withdraw all of the apologies that I've given about my behavior towards Beka, pending this conversation. If after this conversation, it turns out I still owe apologies, then I will make those apologies. But now that I have this other information and this other theory that seems to be pretty good, I want to talk to you about it. Her reply was, no, I don't want to talk about it. I know what happened. That was it. I didn't message her again for 2 years. She also stopped messaging our mutual friend in Europe. Remember, I had fixed her up with that friend in Europe. She stopped messaging her as well. Unbeknownst to me, she had gotten married in the interim and was living in another country in Europe. I don't know how it was that I was on Instagram, which I'm really not on. That's not my thing. But she was writing some poetry. That is Janice. And she was actually a really good poet. I enjoyed reading her stuff. I can't remember how I got her information on Instagram. I can't remember why I started to read her poetry because it's been so long. But I enjoyed it. And I started to respond to it.
As you, or had you taken
No, just publicly as my fake Instagram.
Did she know at that point?
She didn't at first. Not at first. And then she said some things. She was a little bit sad about certain aspects of her life. And I wrote something there and I said, well, you know, your family, in a sense, to me, lights are never really fully out kind of thing. And that's when she realized that it was me. We didn't really have much conversation. I didn't want to really pursue it very deeply. It was just kind of this low-lying thing. And then I told her, I said, you know, I'm going to be bike riding not too far from you. Would you like to meet? She said, yeah, but it has to be conditional. Yeah, you're going to have to come to me. I've gotten married. I live in this little town in this country, and you'll have to come here. So that's fine. And what was really bizarre is she said something like, you said something a couple of years ago that I found offensive, or, you know, that I didn't agree with, and you need to explain that to me. And I'm thinking to myself, you're the one who said you didn't want to talk about it. I'm the one who said we need to have a conversation. And now 2 years later, you're saying we need to have a conversation. I think because I had said I withdraw these apologies, I think she wanted an explanation for that, which I was perfectly willing to give 2 years before. So I was kind of confused. What was she thinking? I wrote her back. I said, listen, here are these two places that I have a choice of riding, which are not far from you. Tell me which one I should do, and I can meet with you. And I didn't hear back from her from that. And that was 2 summers ago.
Hal ended up choosing his own route. It was nowhere near where Janice lived.
And then this past summer, I went back and didn't even message her again because she's the one who left me hanging.
And that's where Hal's relationship with Janice stands today. Just hanging there.
Of all of the Dibblings that I don't have any conversation with, she's probably the one that I miss the most. She had a rebel streak in her. I really like that. She was very different than the others, very different than your upbringing, my upbringing. She went to a boarding school. She smoked the drugs, and yet she still had a PhD to show for it. She was vulnerable. She was down to earth. There were a lot of things I really liked about her, just from a human standpoint. She was wicked smart. They're all wicked smart. Of course, I read somewhere where smart genes actually come from the women's side of the family. So they're smart, but it's not my smart. They have their own smarts. She's the one that I wish I still had a relationship with. I just wish it had been a bit more two-sided instead of just one-sided. There are givers and takers in the world. And when a giver meets a giver, wonderful things happen. Maybe she's just not a giver. If you're in a relationship with a taker and you're a giver, it's not a good thing.
Could there be something narcissistic about Janice?
There could be, but I don't want to label it because I know what that felt like from Beka. It's a different vibe. This girl was much more introspective. I have a feeling that her responses to me might have been because of her very close relationship with Beka.
Jerry, it was okay for Jerry to have a relationship with you, but that was not the case with Janice.
Yes.
She did not give that any blessing.
Yeah, she didn't give that a blessing at any point.
As Hal looked around at the wreckage of his donor-conceived family and the relationships that remained, he saw Beka's fingerprints on everything. But even more than that, Hal saw Beka's relentless influence over everything. And the more he now saw, the more he now realized what he'd missed previously, for instance, in Beka's final missive to him. His new understanding of Beka gave every word she wrote to him new meaning, especially the angry and damning ones.
Because of the things I had learned about narcissistic rage, I just couldn't believe I was this monster that she had portrayed. The whole thing never sat right. It was sticking in my craw. If you think back when I met Janice and she had to message her sibling that she was safe, how did things get to that point? I'm not that kind of person. Virtually anyone who's ever met me in their entire life would agree that within 2 minutes of meeting me, I'm not that person. Why was it that most of the Dibblings didn't want to talk to me? Nothing sat right. It just felt so wrong.
So Hal revisited the letter.
The first thing that caught me was I don't want to cause my parents any more pain that they've gone through. They were looking forward to meeting you. I realized immediately that was a lie. Her mother wanted to meet me. Remember, we had talked about arrangements for her mother to meet me. But she specifically said that her father wanted nothing to do with meeting me. She had said that. And we know that that's not unusual because that was Miles' father's same response, right? That the fathers in these situations generally don't want to have anything to do. No, her parents didn't want to meet me. Her mom wanted to meet me. And I thought to myself, okay, if that's inaccurate, let's go back through this letter again and we'll see what else might be inaccurate. Right off the bat on the top, she says, Hal, I want to be very, very clear with you. I have never been, am not, and will never, ever be attracted to you sexually, romantically, physically, or even emotionally. That's her words. Well, wait a second. If that were the case, why were you texting me so often? Why did you cry several times during our communications? Why did you say that you thought about me every day when you were listening to that program that talked about love? And then why, of course, if you had no feelings about me, would you send me a picture with you wearing that shirt that says, holy shit, I love you? Now we have two strings, and the strings just keep pulling apart. She says, I'm sorry if this is harsh, and I'm not deliberately trying to hurt you. Really? This entire letter is written specifically to hurt me. And the reason you want to hurt me is because I am the mortal enemy for suggesting something that you felt ashamed about, and now you're projecting onto me. I mean, that's what I'm seeing in this. Her words here, I understand that you weren't exactly accusing me of being attracted to you in your email. And I'm thinking, okay, if you understand that, then why the overkill of your letter? Wouldn't have been enough to just brush this aside or just said, hey, where's this coming from? You know, wouldn't that have left the room for the conversation that I was looking for? Then she says, whenever you feel sad and rejected when you think about me in this crazy fucked up situation, you can just tell yourself that I'm in denial. It makes me sick. And my response to that is, that's not true at all. As I explained in my email, I had no idea what you were thinking. That was the whole reason that I sent my letter in the first place, because I didn't know what you were thinking. I was trying to get clarity. Yeah, I admitted to having feelings for you, but I didn't attach the same feelings coming back. I was asking about those feelings. Then she writes, you're testing the waters to see if there's a chance, even if it's a small chance, that I feel the same way. And my response to that is, well, sort of, because you've been sending me these mixed signals. Isn't that what men are supposed to do? Aren't we supposed to ask, isn't that what the Me Too movement is all about? And then she says, if there's any question in your mind about whether the feelings you have towards me are inappropriate, try this little mental experiment. How would you feel looking my father in the eye and telling him how you feel? How would your father feel if I showed him the photo you sent to me that said, holy shit, I love you? Because I have a feeling your father wouldn't really be too happy about seeing that picture. She goes on to write, I don't feel safe. I don't trust you. I'm afraid of what you would try to do with me if we were alone together. Where does she invent that from? There was absolutely nothing in my letter that should have given her that feeling. Nothing. A total invention for the mortal enemy. She writes, although you clearly went through great pains to come across as thoughtful and sensitive, it was ultimately tone deaf. But see, that's just it. She writes here, she knows I clearly went through great pains to come across as thoughtful and sensitive, because it was thoughtful and sensitive about a very difficult topic. I mean, it wasn't the best letter I ever wrote, but it certainly wasn't accusatory. It wasn't dirty or foul-mouthed. She writes, do not write back to this email. More importantly, do not ever contact me again. I am removing you from Facebook and I'm blocking your number. You know, this is one of those boxes that you can check mark for narcissistic rage, because what they want to do is they want to control the conversation. This is how she fixed it with that previous lover. I'm blocking your number. And she also writes, if you do contact me or anyone I know, the only people that we both know are your brother, Miles. Why would you not want me to be able to contact him? And again, this is another checkbox for narcissistic rage. They want to form allies and they want to isolate the mortal enemy. And as we know, she did a great job of doing this. Finally, she says, I hate having to threaten you like this. I'm not that kind of person. But we know that she is this kind of person because she's done this before. She's fixed it. And then she writes, accusing me I couldn't control myself. And again, my response, I didn't initiate the daily texting. You did. And why on earth were you texting me far more often than Miles? She writes, you should be ashamed of yourself for causing irreparable psychological damage. That's what she accuses me of here. And it's like, please, we never even met. And as you said earlier in your letter, you never felt anything for me. Remember, she didn't even have emotional feelings for me. And yet here at the end of the letter, she's saying, I should be ashamed of myself for causing irreparable psychological damage. Which one is it? Did she have feelings for me and I've caused damage, or did she not have feelings for me and she's making this up? Virtually everything she wrote in her letter has no firm basis unless you put it in the context of narcissistic rage. And then it makes perfect sense.
And with that, Hal found a modicum of peace within himself. That's where things still pretty much stand today. Hal has his modicum of peace and hasn't heard much and doesn't hear much of anything from his donor kids. You know, the joke, they never call, they never write. When he quit the sperm donor biz in the mid-1980s, Hal was aware of 14 successful donations. So far, he's met half of them. He knows the others are out there. And so long as 23andMe and Ancestry and the personal genomics business as a whole stays in business, there's always a chance. So what are Hal's takeaways from this experience?
If you look at the world, I'm so blessed. There's so few people who get to live a life that I've been able to lead. I have good health, good healthy genes that I passed along. I have a wonderful family. My adopted son, I don't even have to use the word adopted. I just use that word to remind the audience. But to me, he's my son, is an amazing human being. He'll get my fortune and his mom's fortune. So he'll be fine. So will the two grandkids who are marvelous. His wife is marvelous. And the four of them, they love me to pieces, just as I love them to pieces. We have a wonderful, wonderful relationship, wonderful life. Since leaving my wife, I have found love, had my heart broken, found love. It's all good. And, a word about heartbreak, I think is something that I can teach others about, because I see this all the time in my various Facebook groups and whatnot, where people have trouble digesting heartbreak. For most of us, it's temporary. It is a sharp reminder, a needed reminder, how wonderful it is when you do find love. Without the darkness of heartbreak, you don't understand how wonderful it is when you do have a successful relationship. You can't have one without the other. It's important to have your heart broken occasionally. It's a good reminder. I never wanted to lose my sense of compassion. I still think that is the most important word in the English language. It's important, I think, to be a giver and support your causes, as long as they're worthwhile causes. And whether that cause is the Humane Society down the street, or some forest across the world, or hungry kids somewhere, or your DNA progeny who need some help. It's a wonderful thing to be a giver and to be compassionate, because no one can take that away from you, as hard as they might try to. There's this foundation, I think, that you can build around yourself based on compassion and generosity. I wouldn't redo or undo anything that I did for anyone. That's how it should be. You'll recall in that letter that I sent to Jerry, the prime directive, that the four of them should always have each other. That was the most important thing. And that really is still the most important thing. I believe that from the beginning. I believe it to this day. I will always believe it. It's a wonderful thing that they have each other. And even if they name their kids after each other, it's a wonderful thing. Our audience can't see me. I'm smiling ear to ear.
It kind of answers the question ahead of itself. Would you do it again?
In a second. In a second. Right off the bat, I gave life to 14 people. Not many people get to say they did that. And not only that, not only did I was able to help provide this life, but parents who wanted these people in the world, they had this wish that they were so desperate to have come true that they went so far as to find a donor. Not only was I helpful in creating life, I was helpful in making wishes come true. The scars and bruises I have are small.
At the beginning of this podcast, I promised you there'd be a monster. I guess it's time we talked about it. While all monsters are monsters, not all monsters are villains. Take Frankenstein's monster. Is he a villain? I don't think so. He's really more an unfortunate dead guy who got reanimated without being asked first. He's a misfit. He's misunderstood, which makes him even angrier and more monstrous. He's a creation over which its creator lost control. That's an important distinction, especially in a horror story like this that's triggered by technology. When I started telling Hal's story, I thought the technology and the information it suddenly made available was the monster. There is something Frankensteinian about it. It is our creation, but it's not entirely in our control. Would Hal have acted differently if he had known he was about to confront a monster? He says bringing life into the world was more important, even after all the shit he went through. But that's how we are with monsters, you see. Because they're not necessarily villains, we figure out how to live with them, for better and worse. Then I began thinking technology wasn't so much the monster as it was all the emotions being kicked into high gear. Human emotions can be monstrous too. As for Beka being a monster, I don't see her as one, but her raging narcissism, absolutely monstrous. After hearing Miles' story and Sonny's and then Beth Weaver's story, she was one of the donor-conceived people we met in episode 5, I began to think secrets were this story's monster. As all the donor-conceived people I spoke with agreed, secrecy of one kind or another impacted them profoundly. They all reported how hard it was learning as adults that people they loved had kept important secrets from them. Even learning from their families at an earlier age that they were donor-conceived didn't spare them being treated as a secret by their donor fathers and their families. Many, like Beth Weaver, reported that even though learning they were donor-conceived rocked their world, still, in profound ways, it answered a question they didn't even know they had. But what about the donors themselves and their secrets? If we consider this story from the point of view of a donor who, like Hal, just wanted to help bring new life into the world but had no desire to parent that life, they were entitled to their anonymity and their secret. That was the deal they made. But remember Jeanette, our radiologist, and how she and her siblings found their donor dad and even began a relationship with the daughters he raised over his objections? From his perspective, that was monstrous and out of control. And I think he'd agree that the technology that made it possible for these people he never intended to know to try and know him, it didn't just reveal a secret of his, it completely destroyed his privacy. The technology, and I'm including the internet here, made it possible not only to ID him, but to find him. Find his family, too. Speaking strictly in horror story terms, that is a horror story, and a very modern one. I'm no fan of secrets. They can be destructive as hell. I kept one from myself for 45 years. It nearly killed me. But it's just a stone-cold fact. Having secrets goes hand in hand with being human. It's not one of our better attributes, but it's one of our attributes. Another stone-cold fact. Some secrets really are necessary. Sometimes the truth won't set anyone free. It just makes things worse. Some secrets genuinely protect people from a very cruel world. But between our phones, our computers, the prevalence of security cameras, that constant connectivity has come at a very real cost. The technology is making it almost impossible to keep secrets anymore, or even just have them. That's not a good thing for us in big picture terms. The words horror movie come to mind. Technology, information, secrets, and raw human emotions. What makes Hal's story horrifying was that it had so many monsters, a lot of them competing with each other. From Hal's perspective, if he was ever going to find happiness, or even just his equilibrium again, he needed to deal with his monsters, one in particular. Being a horror story, let's say he needed to exorcise one of them. When one of Hal's donor kids floated the word reconcile, as in Hal with Beka, it brought Hal instant clarity, and he finally found the words that would free him.
You cannot write the kind of letter that Beka wrote to me and think there is some hope of reconciliation. Yes, any problem made by man can be solved by man. This is the exception that proves the rule. This is you don't come back you don't write a letter like this to someone and think that you haven't not just burned the bridge down, you have burned the neighborhood down. You've dried up the river, whatever. There, you don't recross this.
And so The Exorcist went to work.
I don't know if you ever saw a show called The World at War. It's a wonderful, wonderful series about World War II. In one of the episodes, they talk about the Nazis went through Russia. 30 million people were killed. You can imagine the horror stories, the sad stories that came out from the Russian front. And, the Russians, they are artists, literature, painting, and music, and turns out poetry. There is a poem that survived the war, written by a father who lost a son. And we don't have a name for that poet, unfortunately. It's lost, so it's anonymous. And I took this poem and I changed it a little bit and made it into my own poem. And I sent this to Janice, and I said, please send this on to Beka as my final goodbye. I want her to understand that she's essentially dead to me at this point. I also wanted it to be, the dichotomy of how she said goodbye to me and how I would say goodbye to her. Daughter to father, do not call me father. Do not seek me. Do not call me. Do not wish me back. We're on a route uncharted. Fire and blood erase our track. On we fly on wings of thunder, nevermore to sheathe our swords. All of us in battle fallen, not to be brought back words. Will there be a rendezvous? I know not. I only know I still must fight. We are sand grains in infinity, never to meet, never more to see light. Father to daughter. Farewell then, my daughter. Farewell then, my conscience. Farewell, my youth, my solace, my bright star. Let this farewell be the end of a story of solitude past, which now is more lonely, in which we remain barred forever from light, from air, from our death pains untold and unsoothed, never be resurrected, forever and ever, a 30-year-old. Farewell then. No trains ever come from those regions, unscheduled and scheduled. No airplanes fly there. Farewell then, my daughter, for no miracles happen as in this world dreams do not come true. Farewell. I will dream of you still as a baby, treading the earth with little strong toes, the earth where already so many lie buried. This song to my daughter, then, is come to its close.
This has been The Donor, a modern horror story. If you've enjoyed the story, and we hope you have, you can learn even more about Hal and his experience over at our Extras page. You can hear all the extended interviews with him and with everyone else we spoke with while making this podcast. And if you want more information, that's where you'll find all of our sources and resources. It's a pretty interesting world we tapped into. Perhaps it's worth a season 2. Let us know. We'd be happy to oblige. I'm Alan Katz. Thanks for listening. The Donor, a modern horror story, has been a Costard and Touchstone production.